Welcome to the Ergo2go podcast, brought to you by the Back School and Ability on Demand. I'm your host, Matt Jeffs. We bring you interesting people from the world of ergonomics, on-site prevention, health, safety, well-being, and a whole lot more. Don't forget to subscribe below and click on the little bell in the upper right-hand corner to get the latest on the overlapping fields of ergonomics, health and safety, risk management, human resources, and healthcare, right here on the Ergo2go podcast. Today's guest on the Ergo2go podcast is the co-founder of the Health Rosetta, which focuses on the problem that healthcare has become an extractive industry, taking resources from what makes and drives 90% of our best outcomes. The Health Rosetta is an open source blueprint for the next generation healthcare system, built on proven solutions to healthcare's toughest challenges. In his book, The CEO's Guide to Restoring the American Dream, How to Deliver World-Class Healthcare to Your Employees at Half the Cost, this book itself became a #1 Kindle bestseller. His new book, The Opioid Crisis Wake-Up Call, outlines how the opioid crisis isn't an anomaly, but rather a logical and unfortunately tragic byproduct of a catastrophically dysfunctional healthcare system. I don't know where you've been all my life, Dave, but it's my pleasure to welcome to the Ergo2go podcast author Dave Chase. Dave, welcome to the Ergo2go podcast.
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to our chat.
Likewise. Oh my gosh, when I did some of my homework on you, I thought to myself, where's this guy been all my life? Definitely a kindred spirit. So I thought before we get into your new book on the opioid crisis, we ought to give our listeners and viewers a little backstory on what you've been doing with the Health Rosetta. You described, as what I've read, is that it's an ecosystem replicating health outcomes that have rebuilt hope and community by massively improving already proven approaches. Could you tell us a little bit more about that Health Rosetta and your story with it?
Yeah, I mean, it really started with, my background was really on health IT. So I started my career implementing health IT systems inside of a couple dozen different hospitals. Started Microsoft's healthcare partnership ecosystem. They have like 28,000 worldwide partners today in that. And then I actually detoured away from healthcare, came back not quite 10 years ago, and basically wanted to do another startup. I'd done some startups outside of healthcare. And, you know, what's a startup but a bet on how the future is going to unfold and finding a market gap. And I thought, well, you look at the trend line, it looks like healthcare is going to be 100% of our GDP at some point, but it's not going to be. And so there's going to be a breaking point and has to move to pain on value and outcomes. And so I said, well, I'm going to go study these organizations who are already there. Maybe it's against their economic interest, but surely they're out there. Most everybody I've met who went into the clinical field, it was really a calling. And so they went to it for all the right reasons. And so I started studying them. And, you know, I sometimes joke, I went looking for a market gap and I found the greatest heist in American history.
Yes.
And that, basically, as I dug in, and, you know, I was one of those kids growing up that, you know, my parents were fortunately pretty patient. I asked why a lot. You know, if you ask why 5 times, you get to the root cause of just about everything.
That's right.
And so it just kept, you know, it might be something weird going on in healthcare or, you know, you name it. And as I unpacked it, it was just the way we purchase healthcare is not only incredibly ineffective, the collateral damage is devastating. We have a 20-year-long economic depression for the working and middle class in this country. Because if you define an economic depression, which is one of the definitions, is 2 or more years of income decline. By that definition, the working and middle class are in a 20-year-long economic depression. That's twice as long as the Great Depression. And it's not because, and remember, if you're not low income or elderly, you get your benefits for your job overwhelmingly.
Right.
It's not that employers have been stingy. They're actually spending far more money on employees than they did 20 years ago. The problem is every dollar and then some has gone to healthcare. And so I just looked at this and said, gosh, there's got to be a better way. As I basically pulled on this string, I found this dynamic where a lot of people look at healthcare and they know it's a big problem, but they look at it like trying to solve Middle East peace. Like they'd like that solved too, but it seems impossible. And it also seems indecipherable. And I thought about, oh, well, the Egyptian hieroglyphics were indecipherable once upon a time, and the Rosetta Stone helped decode that. And so I was like, wow, these people have cracked the code. They are achieving the quadruple aim, which some of your viewers may know about the triple aim, which is improve the patient experience, improve health outcomes, lower costs. But
Right.
what I found over several years was the ones who consistently achieved that always focused on the fourth and forgotten aim, the improve the care team experience. And you got into that and studied them, and you're like, wow, on the one hand, you look at the status quo and what it's done, where it's created this economic depression. It's bankrupting families and businesses and the country and states. And meanwhile, it manages to do that while making life increasingly miserable for clinicians. There's record levels of burnout and even suicide, particularly amongst doctors. And you could say it's dystopia. And on the other hand, when you study these folks who'd cracked the code, it was utopia by comparison. I kind of joked, this is just a marketing problem. Of course, everybody would want that, utopian-like system where clinicians are happy, patients are incredibly satisfied, the outcomes, if it was in a pill, would be bigger than the biggest blockbuster drug of the century. And they spend less money, so that sort of, it's a long way of answering your question, but that kind of put me on that journey of hey, we need to get this word out there. If you knew the cure to cancer and you didn't share it, that would be criminal. And so that's why we said this has to be open source. This is too important to have some barrier be there. So that's kind of how this long and winding journey transpired.
That's so validating to hear this from a non-clinician, because you're right. Many of us who were immersed in this system went in it for all the right reasons, only to find ourselves in something that basically sucks the soul right out of you. After a while, you're like, gosh, especially when you get into clinicians, you get into a lot of intelligent people. They could have done anything in life. They could have gone into engineering. They could have gone into architecture. They could have gone into a lot of other things that might have left them going home with a sense of accomplishment and purpose. It's amazing that you factored that fourth item, that you're right. A lot of us are just, and to get into things now, it only seems to get worse with like EMR, where we're spending all our time clicking boxes. Wonderful insight. You also were the co-founder of something called Avado that was acquired by WebMD and Medscape. Could you share with us a little bit of that journey?
Yeah, I mean, this was the startup I was referring to.
Oh, forgive me.
Basically it was focused in around improving communication between the clinical team and the patient, and within the clinical team. A great oversimplification of what we did was, think of it as a HIPAA compliant Gmail. It was more than that, but that was kind of, how do you make it ubiquitous? And because WebMD and Medscape, not everybody's heard of Medscape, but it reaches more clinicians than anybody, any organization worldwide.
Right.
WebMD most have heard of. So it's got the clinicians, particularly physicians, and it's got the patients. And so being the connective tissue was really the focus there. And that, was really what ended up getting me on this journey. And once that acquisition was done and it was integrated, and when I left, that was about 3.5 years ago. It was actually, I took a trip with my family to Europe, and it was at the end of the trip where, I'd been thinking, okay, what am I going to be when I grow up, after this deal? And actually at the end of the trip, we visited the British Museum, and saw the Rosetta Stone there, and it was kind of like,
There it
that's,
is.
and so I didn't know exactly how that would manifest itself. I was like, okay, I'm going to give this a name and just get it out there and see where it goes.
Again, I don't want to be presumptuous and speak for all clinicians, but we really appreciate someone of your interest level and background seeing those of us who have been trapped in this thing. You mentioned important elements, like you say, the highest suicide rate of any profession is MDs. What does that tell you? When you look at the published reports in the New England Journal of Medicine, 100,000 deaths a year due to medical errors, or the BMJ report from Johns Hopkins, 400,000 deaths. You wouldn't get on an airplane if that was their record. And so much more. What the U.S. Department of Labor stats are on what we do to our own workers in terms of musculoskeletal injuries, and it goes on and on. And to have someone from your perspective addressing this is a thrill to some of us on the, if I can use the term, inside. We do this in 3 segments. Can you sit tight and we'll get into the opioid book on the next segment and then go from there? Would that be okay, Dave?
Yep, sounds great.
Excellent. This is so exciting, and I can't wait to get to segment 2. So to those listening, you've been listening and watching the Ergo2go podcast. I'm your host, Matt Jeffs, brought to you by the Back School and Ability on Demand. We bring you interesting people like Dave Chase from the world of on-site injury prevention, health, safety, well-being, ergonomics, and a whole lot more. Please don't forget to subscribe below and click on the little bell in the upper right-hand corner to get the latest info in the overlapping fields of ergonomics, health and safety, risk management, human resources, healthcare, right here, and so much more on the Ergo2go podcast. Until next time, everybody, let's be safe, let's be smart, and let's be helpful. And let's get to work. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.